Welcome to our Natural Habitat Adventures webinar today, Discover China's Wild Side, presented by Court Whalen, PhD. Court is coming to us from our offices in Boulder, Colorado, and he has a background in wildlife and conservation biology, which led him to pursue a joint PhD in ecotourism and entomology, while simultaneously coordinating and guiding small group wildlife expeditions and tourism adventures around the world, from leading nature safaris to such far-flung places as Papua New Guinea and Madagascar, to locales closer to home, such as Costa Rica, Belize, and Mexico. And in addition to a passion for discovery, teaching, and adventure, Court is also an avid nature and wildlife photographer, and is always eager to share his knowledge and creative guidance with his guests. So no doubt we will get to enjoy some of his photography through this presentation today. So let me go ahead and turn it over to Court. Welcome, Court.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lee. I really appreciate the introduction as always, and of course appreciate the opportunity to be broadcasting live here out of my home and Nat Hab's home base here in Boulder, Colorado, talking about a really, really cool area of our world and a really cool way to see it on this this trip, the wild side of China, a nature odyssey as we call it. You know, I think that there's perhaps no more fitting of a name for any of our trips than that one for this particular adventure. It really is diving deeply into this very extremely wild side of our planet, and doing so in a very unique way. So my hope is that in the coming slides and throughout the rest of this presentation, you get a good handle on how we do this trip differently. There are no doubt, I'm sure, other ways to go to China. You could probably go on your own. You could go with a big bus company. But if you really have a passion for both culture and nature and wild places and seeing things that are really quite far off the beaten path, this is definitely the way to do it. So without further ado, let me just go ahead and jump right into it as we get into discovering China's wild side. So right off the bat, you know, this is kind of the picture yourself here kind of photo, a photo taken on an expedition of mine a couple of years back. Love this shot. And this is an opportunity. We'll talk more about this maybe later in the presentation, but this is something that we truly hope we can do for each and every traveler on our adventures over to China. And it's this rare opportunity to sit with one of these juveniles, one of these cubs, and just get that close to him. It's absolutely amazing. It's one of these incredible research panda bases in China, in Chengdu. Really cool highlight of the trip. So really at the core of it, while we do have a variety of experiences, and I think you get a really well-rounded view of China, ranging from the wildlife, ranging from the monasteries and the cultures, and all the way to the terracotta warriors and options to go on to the Great Wall afterwards. It really is all about the pandas, and I can't help but love this photo and love these little guys. And if you are passionate about pandas, like a lot of our guests are, this is a really cool way to see them. But like I was saying, there's a lot of other natural wonders that we're going to see on this trip. One of my personal favorites is this national park in Zhai, just directly north of where most of the panda bases are located. This is called Arrow Falls, one of the most absolute pristine, gorgeous places I've seen on planet Earth. We'll get to some more photos later on in the presentation, but just waterfalls in all directions, and great for viewing, great for photography, really cool area. What's more is that it's about the cultural experience, very interesting and unique Chinese cuisine as well. And of course, for photographers out there, you have a lot of opportunities, not just of the nature, not just of the wildlife, not just of the buildings and architecture, but some of the photography you'll see in the coming slides are about little markets that we might stop into, or the entrances of various restaurants. And doesn't this just kind of put you in the scene? Can't you smell that garlic and ginger right before us? This is everywhere. And at the end of the day, it's like I said, it's really exploring the general wildness of China. It's, gosh, you're not in Kansas anymore when you go here, I have to say. It's one of the more unique traveler experiences I have in my life, is visiting China and showing it to interested folks like yourselves. You know, it's a real traveler's trip. I think that as I travel more and guide more, I've now guided, gosh, I don't know, close to 200 expeditions around the world probably. You know, I get drawn into these places that are really authentic and really unique and true traveler's trips. You know, is this the right trip for you if it's your first time out of the country and you just got your passport and you're wanting to go sit on the beach somewhere? No, definitely not. This is not the Bahamas or Bermuda or anything like that. This is an adventure. This is getting to, you might be pushing yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone, but the rewards are incredibly worth it. And let's be honest, you're actually pretty well taken care of and pretty much in your comfort zone the whole time. But from an experiential perspective, it's really, really rich and vivid. And I think that for my fellow travelers out there, you're going to love this experience because of that. So let's kind of take a bird's eye view at the map where we're going to be. We spend most of our time in the Sichuan province. You can see that just kind of bottom left of the circle there. We spend a little bit of time, just a couple days in Shanxi province to the northeast. But most of the time we're going to be in Sichuan. And of course, the entire trip takes place in this middle circle. What I would say is the real heart of China. There are a lot of ways to do China. You could go to Hong Kong. You can go to Beijing. You can go to Shanghai. You can go to these various coastal cities. But I think, from a biological perspective and a traveler perspective, getting into the heart of the country is really what it's all about. These are with some elevation, some mountains some scenery, some wildlife, some of the cooler temperatures. It's really interesting to get into the central part of the region and do China in a very, very different way. And I think it's the best way, humbly speaking. Zooming in a little bit into the map of Sichuan province proper, we start our trip in Chengdu, right here in the middle. But as you'll see in the coming slides, even though we're spending most of our time in one province and a little bit of time in the second, you're actually traversing quite a variety of landscapes. From these beautiful bamboo forests, really unique environments, to more like a montane broadleaf forest. Here we're in the Muntjac mountains. You can see instantly quite different, just very, very lush and green. We're going over high mountain passes and getting awesome photographs down these valley stretches. We're going to riverine areas with incredible waterfalls and these exquisite turquoise and green colored high alpine lakes. We're getting really, really unique cultural experiences. We're diving ourselves into remnants of a culture that is almost 2,000 years old and just discovered almost 3 decades ago. It's absolutely incredible. So it's a really unique time to visit China, I think, and that sort of permeates the entire trip about how we probably will be the only Westerners you see on this adventure. Maybe not the case if you go just straight to the Great Wall and back, but if you really dive deeply, as this itinerary does, it's an incredibly unique view that, let's be honest, it's places like this don't remain undiscovered for long. So I think it's a great time to get in and really treat yourself to a wild, enthralling experience, travel experience. Activities are pretty diverse too, just as diverse as the environments, to be honest. There's a good bit of hiking and walking involved in natural areas as well as urban environments. We'll get to the physicality in a little bit. It's not a difficult trip, but there is walking, so just keep that in mind. We also have really interesting cultural shows. This is known as the Sichuan Opera, and what a cool way to kind of round out the day of exploration, seeing this beautiful opera with singing and dancing and costume changes and mask changing. Really, really unique stuff. The food. This is not your chop suey and lo mein from the New York Chinese restaurant. This is the real deal. This is really authentic food. It's fresh. Everything's right from the garden or right from the local market. A lot of the dishes you have probably never seen before. It's definitely authentic Chinese food, but as you can probably imagine, the Chinese food you get from the place down the road here in the U.S., it's kind of like how Tex-Mex is. It's a little bit of a different version. So the cuisine is really quite an eye-opening, beautiful experience too. Everything is served in this wonderful family style. It brings the group together for every meal, talking about our experiences and sampling all sorts of new dishes constantly. So it's a really unique element of the trip. Like I said, this food all comes right from the market just down the road, and walking in markets is something that I love to do. I'm a wildlife biologist, so I get really excited when I see wildlife, whether it's pandas here or polar bears in the Arctic or whatever. But I'll tell you, one of my honest to goodness favorite activities when traveling is to walk in markets. I feel like you get such a tangible idea of what's going on around you by seeing the local people shopping for their daily wares. I think it's also really, really fun for photography. I am a pretty keen photographer. I lead our photo trips as well. And walking through markets, this might be a little bit more of a familiar sight with some corn and some beans and okra in the background. We're getting a little bit different here with some large grapes and some plums and apricots and pomegranates and whatnot. And then we start to get into the spices, and it just gets so diverse from there. There are dozens of kinds of peppers and beautiful photographs to be had when you're walking through these markets. The colors and the textures and the contrasts, really, really lovely. And then there's probably about 10 times as many varieties of mushrooms throughout the country. And one of the cool stops is we actually, when opportunity arises, visit a local mushroom farm. And I don't quite remember the local word for these mushrooms, but like I said, there's probably a couple hundred varieties of mushrooms throughout the country. Very integral in the cooking, integral in the dishes, and really unique experience to see how this is grown in rural China. No trip to China would be complete without visiting some monasteries too. The architecture and the history here is absolutely breathtaking. And coming right back to photography, not just those big sort of landscape shots, but also kind of getting into the behind the scenes and seeing these beautiful Buddhist scrolls, just endless and really, really captivating scenes as we explore around these grounds. So that was kind of like a very quick whirlwind overview of some of my favorite things about China, why I think this trip is different and special and extraordinary in many ways. But let's kind of, I guess, dive a little deeper into what our itinerary holds. So the itinerary starts in Chengdu, China, like I said. It's central in the entire country. It's a pretty bustling big city, to be frank. It's considered a medium-sized city in China, but it still has a population of 14 million. So that just kind of goes to show you the scale of everything going on around you. But it's not without its charm. I think it's a really cool city to explore, and it's this interesting east meets west sort of vibe. In fact, this beautiful bridge, which we'll get to photograph and view when we're spending our time walking around Chengdu, we actually have dinner there at that restaurant, which is that entire structure on the bridge on the last night of the trip. A really, really cool way to do a farewell dinner, and what an exquisite scene, isn't it? But again, we're really here for these little guys, the panda. Just definitely a highlight of the trip, and it's really the main thing that we're doing in Chengdu. Like I said, we're exploring the city. There's lots of interesting markets and sights and sounds and hustle and bustle to experience and to photograph and enjoy and to create memories out of. But this is where the panda bases are. This is where the research centers are that house the vast majority of pandas in China. You can get really, really great views in their natural enclosures here. The natural enclosures are actually quite big and vast. You can see all sorts of different behaviors. No doubt the cubs are always the most charismatic. They're super active. They're climbing. They're wrestling with one another. But then at the same time, how can you not fall in love with a basket of young pandas here? And this is on one of our little behind-the-scenes tours of the breeding center. And look at that one just up to the top left of the enclosure, just on its back, taking a little snooze. I could watch these guys for hours. Really, really cool to see. And they invariably grow up to be the ones that are scampering about outside. For viewing and photography, it's very, very good. Like I said, the natural enclosures are huge tracts of land with trees and great foreground and background elements. There's no place in the world better to get photos and views of pandas in these bases. We do visit a few different bases in the course of the trip. Some of them have something like around 10 to 15 pandas in the base itself. Others have upwards of 100 plus. It's really, really quite different. As you can imagine, the ones with 100 plus have a little bit larger crowds, but our goal is to get you behind the scenes, to get you there at the off times, to get as close as possible to these amazing creatures. And like I said, for photography, it's really quite amazing. So kind of taking a quick aside to talk about the panda in general, I wanted to throw this slide up here. One of the most fun things about leading these trips and being on them as a participant, as you would be, is I think, learning about this stuff in the field. So I won't spend a whole lot of time going over this here. It'd be much better to chat about it as we're looking at pandas and photographing them down there. But, it's often a question right off the bat is, well, is the panda really a bear? There was some debate about that a couple of decades ago, but now that we've been able to do a lot of DNA research nowadays, it's very, very clear into the hierarchy of bear evolution. There are 8 different species of bears on Earth. Evolving to the very latest and greatest bears. The brown bear and polar bear are probably the most recent, as what this sort of very cursory tree of life says. So actually the panda is the oldest bear genetically. It's kind of predated all the other bears, and it evolved just like the raccoons and the red pandas did it evolved from a common ancestor about 40 million years ago. So it's really cool. So that they're actually, the reason that they thought that they may not be bears is because they are quite different from the other bears. They have different hands and feet and diets and behavior and habitats and reproductive abilities and all sorts of things. So they're really quite unique. If you're the kind of person that has enjoyed, our other bear trips, whether it's grizzlies or polar bears, this is definitely a bear to fall in love with next, just to put it in one way. I kind of mentioned the red pandas. These guys are really charismatic, and I'd be remiss if I didn't show at least a couple slides in this presentation of photos that you could get at these panda bases. It's not just the giant panda, but these red pandas, which are actually, they're not pandas, they're not bears, they're more closely related to raccoons. As you can probably tell from the look, they have quite distinct features. You can get photos of these guys in their own natural enclosures, whether they're up in trees, whether they're foraging on the ground, hunting on the ground. I think, honestly, these are almost as charismatic as the giant pandas in a lot of ways. Really, really cool critters. So in general, these bases, it's quite fascinating. China is wildly proud of their pandas. That may be a surprise to some, maybe not so much to others. It is really a national symbol. So they throw so much, weight behind these panda bases as a government, as a country. They are so proud of their pandas, almost to a fanatical level, and they're just incredibly excited to show them off to their world, to the rest of the world. So they treat these panda bases really well. The level of infrastructure, you may go into it thinking, well, this is sort of a developing nation. I'm not sure exactly what a research center might be like. It is state-of-the-art. It is really, really top-notch, and I think this massive bronze sculpture outside of every panda base kind of shows you an example of what it's really like. I mean, they do it up right there. So that's your first couple of days in Chengdu, and that's going to be your very first couple of panda experiences. The middle of the trip is going to be a little diversion from that, and then we're going to round out the trip at the very end with, I think, probably the best panda experience of all, but we'll get to that in just a second. So yeah, this is not a real glamorous photo. This is actually just the best photo I could find of the train itself. We're taking a bullet train up to Xi'an, so that other province I mentioned to the northeast, and we're going here for two specific purposes. One is to see these incredible terracotta warriors. I feel like this is a huge, huge highlight of the trip. Really, really cool addition. Great for photography, great for viewing, really interesting learning experiences here. And then the other reason is to see these, the golden monkeys. I think these are, again, one of the real highlights of the adventure. We go trekking for these guys, and you can actually get surprisingly close. I wouldn't quite use the word habituated or certainly not tame, but they're not all that afraid of humans. You can get really incredible photographs and views of these guys. Really interesting natural history as well. So we take that slight diversion up to that province to the northeast, and we come right back down to return to the Sichuan province, and we're now getting into our green space. This part in Tanjiahe National Park, I think, is a really interesting foray into the wilds. This is where we get even more wild. Seeing pandas and golden monkeys and seeing terracotta warriors, certainly wild, but we get into a real, honest-to-goodness green space here, and it's just a spectacular landscape. Before we do that, we often have these really cool experiences, and I can't say exactly where we fit this kind of stuff in the itinerary because every trip is in a lot of ways kind of customized to what's going on the ground. We have amazing flexibility. You have an expedition leader just like myself and a couple of local guides with us the entire time that can facilitate these excellent experiences. But just to show you one as an example, we stopped at this very rural school in the middle of the Minshan Mountains and just dropped in on them. We brought some school supplies. We were immediately tapped as the guest lecturers for the day, and immediately they stopped everything they were doing and they broke into groups as if they knew, and we did these little programs with them with workbooks. And so every guest, and even myself, we broke in with a few children and taught them English for the next half an hour or so with their workbooks. And I've got to say, it was incredible to meet these, future leaders of our world here. So smart, so educated, so interested, so passionate. So a really cool foray into getting to, interact with the local communities on our expedition here. But anyway, like I said, we do these things. I can't say it's necessarily right before we get to Tanjiahe. It could be right after. We do incorporate those when possible, but we are making our way to Tanjiahe National Park. And this is, like I said, it's our green space. It's our nature and wild experience. Beautiful, beautiful little cascading waterfalls here. You saw this photo before as we're traversing this kind of high mountain road in the Minshan Mountains. And not only were we immersed in beautiful landscapes and scenery, but this is where we get to see some really cool geology. Again, like many things, it's much more fun to talk about the geology as we're walking down the trail, looking for neat rocks and wildlife actually in China, but I'll give you a quick precursor. Everything that we're on right here is a super ancient coral reef ecosystem. So this is actually mostly limestone and sandstone. You do have some more kind of volcanic and metamorphic rock mixed in, but this is all an ancient coral reef uplifted, not too dissimilar from how the American Southwest might look and how it might be in certain areas of like Capitol Reef National Park and Escalante. It's this limestone that's been thrust upward. But because we're in sort of a cloud forest elevation here, it's really, really, really green. There's a lot of vegetation going on. And that brings a cool wildlife. So here's a takin, really iconic species of the area. Good chance of getting close views and close photographs. This one, I'll be honest, I can't guarantee it every trip, but a male golden pheasant. Not uncommon by any means, but yeah, a really special sighting. So with a bit of luck, we'll see this guy maybe even more than once as we traverse the trails. Muntjacs and barking deer, rather common in the area. They don't all walk with their tongue sticking out like that. I just figured this was the funniest photo to show in a presentation. But they're nevertheless really cool animals. They make this loud barking sound. You can see this deer actually has two large canines coming out from either side of its snout there. Really interesting biology. Tibetan macaques. If you've traveled elsewhere in Asia, you know that macaques are often found in civilization, around temples. They're, you know, to be totally honest, they're kind of annoying animals. They're the ones that are kind of the cheeky macaques that will, you know, taunt visitors to temples and monasteries. These guys are purely wild. It's a totally different species. They're much more woolly. You can see this big male is actually adapted to this slightly cooler climate. Big furry head and mane, more or less. So really, really cool sighting. Good chance of seeing these. The elephant in the room is, are we going to see any pandas when we're in this wild panda nature reserve? Tanjiahe is also known as the Wild Panda Nature Reserve. So the truth is the chances are pretty slim. They are absolutely there. There's a pretty decent-sized population. In fact, you may have noticed or read recently in the last year or so that pandas have been making quite a bit of a rebound, and they're really on the increase. Panda sightings and panda populations are increasing to a level that has previously, we haven't gotten to the 1,800 population size for about, I want to say 20 or 30 years now. So the chances are getting better and better to see them, but I have to set expectations in that the main panda sightings are in those research facilities and in the conservation areas that we see in Chengdu at the start and end of the trip. But nevertheless, we absolutely look for them, and I think just the sense of looking for pandas, for wild pandas in bamboo thickets, is a really invigorating feeling. Even if we come up empty, just the prospect, like the hope of seeing him is a really fun activity. And of course, as we're going along, we're seeing takin and muntjac and hopefully golden pheasants and all sorts of other cool stuff along the way. There's also another bear actually in these areas known as the moon bear or the Asiatic black bear. You may have seen in that tree of life or cladogram as we call it, one of the 8 bear species is known as the Asiatic black bear, and that is actually, again, we don't see it absolutely every trip, but we do see it, and that's a really cool bear to check off the list, to be totally honest. I think that, you know, if you stick with Nat Hab long enough, you'll notice that within our suite of expeditions, you literally could see all 8 bears around the world in a lifetime, and I think seeing a moon bear or an Asiatic black bear, as they're called, here is a pretty darn good chance. One of the better places in the world, to be honest. But you know, the truth is this is such a unique area. Even seeing the smaller stuff, whether we're on a night hike or an early morning hike, and we're seeing this beautiful Chinese silk moth, we're seeing this really cool, delicate, small satyrid butterfly on a leaf. the opportunities are pretty good for just getting out into wild and seeing stuff that you're never going to see if you were to go on another trip to China with, you know, a big bus tour to the main cities. We're really getting out there, and China, although it, you know, has a little bit of controversy with its environmental ethics, and, you know, I won't go into any real laborious detail, they do a pretty darn good job of preserving the national parks. So it's very pristine, really good wildlife sighting, and pretty good infrastructure. You know, this everything is on a different level in China, so I can't say this is necessarily a 4 or 5-star hotel, but it's pretty comfy for being in the middle of nowhere. It's a bit kind of like a Jurassic Park feel, where they built this wonderful, expansive structure, but it's really not on the map for most visitors. I know that some local folks will come here and they'll have weddings here a couple times a year, but, you know, for being able to hold 50 to 60 to 70 guests, we're usually the only people there. We have the place to ourselves. And it's a really cool, again, very remote, authentic traveler experience. And you can see, just like all the panda bases, that bronze panda statue or sculpture right in the front, very prominent. So from there, what we're doing is we're heading north. Okay, so we've been up to Xi'an to see the terracotta warriors. We're back just north of Chengdu in Tanjiahe. It's not on the map, but just imagine it being there, sort of in the northern section of that red road. And we're making our way north to Zhuzhaigo, that northernmost word on the map. On the way, we're passing some really, really cool things, really cool sceneries. We're making our way slow and steady. There's a beautiful high mountain pass. Some days, you know, you can get views and photos like this when it's a little cloudy and a little rainy. Sometimes it clears up. I have a photo, I don't think I put it in here, of a beautiful rainbow going over that pass. We're just taking our time to explore. This is the highest point on the trip, but it's, you know, we don't spend a lot of time here, and even though you see in this photo someone hiking, we're just kind of getting out of the vehicle and looking around and just taking some snapshots, looking for some unique wildflowers, et cetera, because really our goal is to get to here, Zhuzhaigo National Park, which is, gosh, if there was a Garden of Eden, this would definitely be a poster child for that imagery. It's so incredible to see these high alpine lakes and, again, these beautiful waterfalls. You're really in pure bliss here. It's so exquisite. You know, again, I keep on talking about photography, but the photographs are just stunning here. You can use these slow shutter speeds and get this beautiful silky waterfall effect, and the park is quite large, and every waterfall and every view is a little bit different. You go all the way to the end to view these beautiful high mountain lakes. You get a little bit of mist in the background. The boardwalks, really great vantage points, great for just exploring. Even though this is a really pristine natural area, the wildlife is not going to be what it was at Tanjiahe, but again, the scenery here is just exquisite. You can see how that limestone, like I was saying, the limestone, these Muntjac mountains, very much kind of like how a spring would be in central Florida, you know, that really cool kind of blue turquoise color. The reflection ponds are just beautiful. So it's a great place for a photo op. So we spent our last couple of days there exploring all those high alpine lakes and waterfalls and just exploring the beauty. And then we actually take a flight back. It's about an hour-and-a-half flight, but it saves us a good 10 to 12 hours of driving. So we do fly back to Chengdu, and then we spend our last couple of days exploring the very last panda base on the itinerary. And I think it's one of the best. Not only just the infrastructure, the way that they have the natural enclosures set up, but probably more than anything, this really, really unique opportunity we have to actually volunteer at this panda base. Now, you know, I have to say with a caveat that the panda bases say how things happen. You know, if for some reason the panda is sick or something's going on, maybe very, very slim chance this would be canceled. But I do have to say that the panda bases really do dictate based on their conditions on the ground whether we can do this, but all my groups have been able to, and it's a really fun experience. We're actually literally just helping clean up a panda enclosure. They do put the pandas away into the building on the left while we're in there sweeping things up, but it's a really cool experience because, you know, you're giving back, but you're also doing something that nobody else gets to do. And I think these are the kind of things that we always look for as a company. So if we're not able to do this, rest assured, we're going to do something really, really awesome here at the base. And of course, this is also the best chance, again, sort of conditions depending, if you can have this really extra VIP experience to sit and basically cuddle a panda. It's usually a pretty quick thing. You know, you're not there for hours. It's usually just like a part of a minute, but I'll tell you, each and every person that sits down, they feel like it was just the most life-changing experience for them to actually sit, touch the panda, watch them up close, and interact on that really, really close level. You can see that they're very, very protective with them. They make you kind of garb up, so to speak, with these gloves and these smocks, but it's really quite neat, I have to say. So that rounds out the trip, and like I was showing you that first photo, or second photo of Chengdu, we have our farewell dinner at that beautiful restaurant on the bridge. So that was kind of the itinerary in brief, but I wanted to go over kind of the FAQs, the common questions, the things that you might want to be considering as you consider this trip. So we'll talk about seasons, weather, and other details. So seasonality, we do trips kind of in what I would term the springtime and the late summer, fall time. You might be wondering, well, when should I go? Should I go in May? Should I go in September? What are the differences? Why would one be better than the other? What should I consider? At the end of the day, there's not a massive difference in the sense that one is better than the other. In fact, there's no way to say one's better than the other. There are slightly different considerations. So if you go in the first part of the year, we're in the northern hemisphere, so you can imagine what the weather might be like in the northern part of the U.S. in late April and May. It's, you know, you have a little bit of unpredictability in weather. It could be cold. Sometimes there is, you know, you get cooler temperatures in the 30s and 40s as the low during the day, especially when we're in a little bit higher elevation. The highest we'll really go is to actually sleep is in and around the 5,000 foot mark, but we do explore Zhai quite a bit higher than that, in and around the 8,000 and 9,000 foot range. We don't spend a lot of time there, but just to note that at that elevation, yeah, you could probably be getting into the 30s and 40s as the low. The highs would probably be around you know, 50s, 60s, 70s. The springtime, again, making a generalization, you will probably get more wildflowers in bloom in the spring, but you'll get more water in the rivers, in the waterfalls, and in the creeks during the fall. And since waterfalls are such a unique part of this trip, that's quite a big, you know, big plus. But when there's more water in these creeks and waterfalls, that also means the chance of rain is a little bit higher. In the fall, you're going to get a bit warmer temperatures. The deciduous forests are going to be more flush. Things are going to be more green and vibrant. So while you might not have the same level of wildflowers, you're going to get a more lush landscape. So again, you can see how I'm kind of going back and forth. There are slight differences, but I don't think there's anything real convincing as to what the quote-unquote better time would be. And that also goes for wildlife viewing. So just keep that in mind. If you have more questions on that and you can only go during a certain time of year and you want to get more details, reach out to us. Give our office a call and chat with someone in our adventure team here, and they'll definitely fill you in more. So like I said, temperatures, that's probably, you know, I would say maybe the main consideration between spring and fall. We're probably looking at highs in the 60s and 70s in the spring, lows around 30s and 40s. And the falls, you know, uptick that by about 10 degrees. So you get kind of highs in the 70s and 80s and lows in the 40s and 50s. So if you're really a warm weather person, you hate cold, that might be enough to decide for you. Food. You know, another consideration is that the food, there's I would say Sichuan food is probably most famous for spice. You definitely do not have to have spice in your food, but the food is quite flavorful. The food is very plentiful, but it is a lot of Chinese food. So just know that going into the expedition, that because we really are off the beaten path, it's going to be a lot of traditional soups and pork and chicken and broccoli and beans and star beans and shrimp and rice and things like that. They actually do. Because we can order off menus and we know exactly what's in each and every dish, we can actually handle any sort of dietary requirements that you have. So just keep that in mind, that although the food is largely traditional Chinese food, any sort of dietary requirements, gluten-free, vegetarian, anything like that, we can absolutely handle. The physicality. So it is a walking trip. The walks are not all that difficult, but we are doing a good bit of walking. You know, the average amount of walking for one day in one of these Panda bases might be 3 to 5 miles. As you can see, this is the Panda base infrastructure right here, so it's pretty even level walking, so it's almost like, you know, walking around like a shopping mall. It's very, very flat. You're not going to have a lot of physicality. But as I also show in this photo, there could be some rain. It could sprinkle some rain, and you know, it gets a little bit slippery. So just some good walking shoes, some good tennis shoes, anticipating maybe upwards of 5 miles a day, and that's really the main part of the physicality. Like I said, we do get into a little bit of elevation as we go up north to Zhai, but the average is probably around the 5,000 to 7,000 foot range, which I would say for most people, just in my experience as an expedition leader, is below any sort of threshold for altitude issues. But that being said, some people are quite sensitive to altitude, so just keep that in mind that we do get a little bit of altitude on this trip, the vast majority of the trip being in around the 2,000 foot level. Wildlife spotting. So, you know, as with all trips, I do want to set the expectations that, you know, sometimes wildlife could be difficult to see. You know, this is definitely not an African safari. This might be what we're looking at for the takin here. You know, it might be a little across the valley, a little shrouded, a little hidden. But that being said, there's always really good wildlife opportunities here and there. It's just not that each and every sighting is going to be perfect, like seeing a leopard in a tree right in front of you 10 feet away. And I want to stress that, you know, even though it might be a little bit difficult to spot wildlife, I think that the scenery and the just sense of expeditionary style travel is really what differentiates this trip. It's absolutely incredible. I wouldn't do this trip for only wildlife spotting. If you're only going because you want to get 1,000 photos a day of muntjacs and pandas and takins, it's, you know, it's more of a well-rounded trip than that. But you're instantly going to realize that, like I said before, you're not in Kansas anymore. Soak up the experience, the scenery, the people, the interactions you have, the stories from your expedition leader, from the local guides. If you're a photographer, you're going to leave home with a lot of amazing travel photos. I can promise you that. There are special experiences throughout the trip, and I'm not going to go into too much detail here because I think it's best to be surprised on these things. But as an example, here we're in a traditional Tibetan home. We took a little tour of their home here and learned about these stories that are inscripted on the walls. This is like hundreds and hundreds of years old here, this traditional home. And we sit down for a nice traditional lunch with the family here. It's a close friend of our local guide here, and it's an experience you can't get anywhere else in the world with any other group. I can tell you that. And again, you know, I only showed a fraction of the photos I have of the scenery and otherworldly landscapes. But look at this. Isn't this, they call these fairy ponds, and it's absolutely incredible what the limestone karst will do at these waterfall pools. So I showed you some cool waterfalls. Just know that's the tip of the iceberg in terms of the impressive scenery out there. And at the end of the day, you know, I think that it's all about these guys as well. The pandas absolutely envelop your sense of wonder and your appreciation with wildlife there. So getting to see these guys at the beginning and the end of the trip and having that chance, even though it's a slim one, of seeing them in the bamboo forest of Zhai, this is a really, really big highlight of the trip. But again, like I said, as a fellow traveler, I think it's the genuine travel experience that is really the key selling point of our China adventure. So with that, I will thank you. I appreciate your attention, and I'd love to entertain any questions, whatever they might be.
Okay, well, thank you, Court. We've got some great questions here. We have questions. I know you talked a lot about wildlife. There were some specific questions about birding. How's the birding there?
It's pretty darn good. Yeah, I didn't go into too much detail, but I would say, you know, I'm always careful to tout the birds too much because we're generally not a real birding company. We're more of a general wildlife company, but in certain areas, China is a great example, the Amazon's a great example, Costa Rica is a great example. The birds are pretty darn good, and they tend to be one of the highlights of the experience because, you know, truth be told, there aren't dozens and dozens of species of big mammals or primates, you know, here in China. So yeah, the birding is quite good, and we do focus on that, and knowing your preferences ahead of time helps us help you too. So yeah, we'd be delighted to show you the awesome birds of China too.
Okay, great. Thank you. And for photography tours, is a list of recommended equipment that will be that you should bring provided prior to the trip?
Absolutely, always. Yeah, that's something that we do, and I actually personally curate that. So I make sure that you have all the information on different lenses if you do use a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. If you have a point-and-shoot camera, we give you good recommendations on, even techniques from composition and lighting styles. We also have a whole separate website that if you do contact our office, they'd be happy to send you links to. That's called thenaturalphotographer.org, and it's all my personal photo tips and advice for all of our trips around the world, and China is definitely one that I have articles written on. And then last but not least, you definitely get your spiral-bound notebook before the trip with specific recommendations of those lenses and camera types and all sorts of stuff. If you ever have any questions like that, you're always welcome to give our office a call and talk to me directly, and I'd be personally happy to walk you through.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is there a limit on the baggage that one can bring along?
Not really. Typical international flights, like 50 pounds a bag per person. We do try to keep it to just one 50-pound bag along with any carry-ons, but I think most people don't have a problem. There are a lot of places around the world like Africa, Alaska, where you are on very small planes. Here, the vast majority is driving, and then even that domestic commercial flight, there aren't really any regulations beyond what you would normally have just getting to China in the first place.
All right. And what size group will be expected on these trips?
We do a maximum of 12 to 14.
Great.
Yep, so very small group travel like we do for all of our adventures. I think that's a pretty key part of the experience. Again, there are big bus tours to China where you're sort of shepherded along from site to site, but having that small group means that you can divert from the itinerary. If you see something really cool or a special experience that just popped up, meeting with a certain group or a certain person or seeing a certain monastery at an off hour, we can make those changes because we're small and we're like-minded, and we have this kind of flexibility that is almost impossible with any other style of adventure out there.
Oh, that's good to know. Thank you. So what about free time? Will our travelers have ample free time for wandering on their own in Chengdu?
Yeah, I would say ample is always a bit of a subjective word, so it kind of depends on the individual person as to what they're really expecting. But yeah, there is definitely free time in the itinerary. I do recommend, because it is a long ways to travel, if folks are interested in getting a little bit of free time before the expedition really starts, coming to China and Chengdu a day or two early. We do have what's known as extra day program options, where if they want to come in and have a full day of activities, they can certainly sign up for that, and our office will supply you with all those details of what you would do on a typical day and the price and all that. But yeah, if you want to come in early and just kind of experience things on your own, it's a pretty friendly city to get around, as far as big cities go. We stayed at a really, really cool hotel in a perfect location, so adding an extra night onto the start of the trip, staying in the same room as you would for the next couple of days when the trip actually begins, is very, very doable. So again, knowing that ample time is a little bit of a subjective term, if they really want to have like a half day to do some self-exploration, I would come in early.
Okay, and speaking of coming in early, are there actually any pre or post extensions that are already put together?
Yeah, there are. We actually have one of each. So one pre-trip extension in Chengdu, so you actually get to see Chengdu with our expedition leader. And then there's a post-trip extension. So sorry, the pre-trip is one extra night. So it actually is built half because it's a great way to see more of Chengdu, like the city itself, since we do focus a lot on the China or the Panda bases for those first couple of days. So if you want to see more of Chengdu, that's a great option for that one extra night. And then after the trip, we have a Great Wall extension of 2 nights. And that's something I would say the majority of people do, maybe like a little over 50%. The reason we do have it as an extension is a lot of people have, I won't say a lot, but enough people have seen the Great Wall already, or they incorporate that with a different trip to China, that since we are trying to get into the wilds of China, we have that as an optional extension. I think it's certainly a highlight. If this is your one time to get over to China, definitely add that on. And I'll talk very briefly on that, but you probably, if you Google Great Wall tours or anything like that, see photos, you're going to see hordes and hordes of people. Sticking with the Nat Hab style, we go to a different part of the wall that is much less access. It's a little bit harder to get to in terms of transportation and logistics, but we take care of all that for you, and you wind up in an area that has a fraction of the people of, you know, the quote-unquote main areas of the Great Wall. And I can promise you it's no less interesting. It's really more interesting because you can dive deeper and see more without the crowds of tourists around. So I think that's kind of a parallel to everything we do as a company. We're always trying to get you the better experience, the more intimate experience, to leave you with a better impression of the place that you're exploring.
Thank you for expanding a little bit on the Great Wall, because we had several people asking about that, so appreciate you taking the time on that. So we'll stop there, and we'll collect the rest of these questions and do some follow-up, some private follow-up afterward. So let me turn it back over to you for closing comments.
Yeah, thanks, Lee, and thank you to all you out there and your attention and your interest in this amazing area. As I hope you can tell, I'm really passionate about travel and authentic experiences, and I think that this trip really checks all those boxes. It is a special place to travel. It's a special time to travel to this special place. So yeah, I checked, before I came into this webinar, I checked availability, and we do have some spots left for 2018. So I'd love to see you out in the field. Hope I get to see these awesome sights and sounds and maybe photograph next to you.
All right. Well, my thanks as well, and we will get the replay out to all of you, and we thank you all for being with us. So this will conclude our webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Court.
Thank you.